Hello, I'm Kai Lee, Professor of Chemistry and Provost of the University of Chicago.
So I'm Peter Andre Alt, I'm President of the German Rectors Conference.
Thank you for joining us today for our conference, Freedom of Expression on the Culture of Debates at Universities. We are pleased to partner with the German Rectors Conference to bring leading scholars together to examine the current state as well as the future of free debate at universities. This conference comes at a pivotal time for both of our nations, as demographic changes and political movements have raised questions about free speech and social norms. We've seen colleges and universities disinvite speakers in deference to groups that oppose those speakers. And around the globe, we are wrestling with racism and injustice and the role of police as people harness the power of protest to make their voices heard. The growing challenge to free expression at universities in the United States and in countries like Germany signals a larger problem that extends beyond college campuses. In all this, what is our role as an institution of higher learning? At the University of Chicago, our commitment to free expression is foundational to who we are and our educational mission. We don't teach students what to think, but rather how to engage with ideas, to challenge assumptions, to evaluate data and facts, to pursue the truth. We also have an enduring commitment to diversity and inclusion. We aim to foster an environment in which people from different backgrounds can bring their unique perspectives and participate fully in the life of our campus, which is critical for the robust debate of ideas. More than ever, our students need the skills and courage to explore new and difficult ideas head-on and without fear. The scale of the challenges facing our world reinforce the need for education that prepares young people to grapple with complex problems and pursues better solutions. To that end, our faculty articulated the Chicago Principle in 2015 and codified the University of Chicago's long-standing core belief in free, robust, and uninhibited debate. Since then, the Chicago Principles have been adopted by dozens of colleges and universities across the country. And while our commitment to free expression has never wavered, the world continues to change, raising new questions about how to foster campus environments that welcome vigorous debate and discourse. Even now, in the midst of a global pandemic, we are engaging over Zoom rather than face-to-face as we had originally planned. Social media has expanded the marketplace of ideas, which come with many trade-offs. A growth in the number and diversity of voices, but also new avenues for the spread of false claim and uncivil or even threatening speech on the one hand, and allegations of fake news on the other. Today, we'll engage with these questions and many more, and we look forward to a spirited discussion. With that, I'll turn it over to HRK President, Professor Dr. Peter Andre Alt, for additional remarks.
Mein Video ist gestoppt. So, thank you, Provost Lee, for your introductory remarks, and please allow me to add the perspective of the German Rectors Conference. Today, for the first time, the University of Chicago and the German Rectors Conference co-organize an online discussion. We are pleased to jointly host what I hope will turn out to be a lively and informative debate on the principles and practice of freedom of expression at our university. All of us will probably agree that free speech as one specific dimension of academic freedom is one of the cornerstones on which our universities rest. for a long period of time, we have taken for granted the right to express ourselves freely on campus. In recent years, with the rise of populist politics, the widespread use of social media, and an upcoming skepticism towards science, things have certainly changed. In the current moment, universities are called upon to reassert their commitment to free speech. Not only is free speech an essential dimension of academic freedom, free speech is also of central importance to open and democratic societies. Like liberal democracy itself, universities rely on the freedom to think, question, and share ideas. And like liberal democracy itself, universities have been targeted by those who do not believe in a plurality of legitimate perspectives. It is certainly no coincidence that the crisis of liberal democracy as currently witnessed across so many countries goes hand in hand with attacks on academic freedom. I strongly believe that the commitment to free speech is an essential element of our university's culture, which needs to be protected in a time of great uncertainty and political upheaval. In their open-ended and dialogic pursuit of deeper understanding and truth, universities and science have the potential to act as role models for society at large. The right to express oneself freely and to engage in open inquiry is a necessary prerequisite for universities to fulfill their two core missions: to provide an outstanding education for their students and to conduct groundbreaking research. Universities therefore need to defend the principles of freedom of speech and free inquiry against any attempts to curtail them. In recent years, we have witnessed a series of incidents at universities across Germany in which the right of free expression has been misused and distorted beyond recognition. Given the current political climate, we will probably see similar attempts in the future. In each single instance, we will have to stand our ground and defend free speech. Still, putting free speech into practice at our institutions has never been easy. Tolerance should be our guiding light. Yet, tolerance ends where intolerance and violence begin. There are limits to free speech on campus, and we currently witness an intense struggle over what can be said at our universities. This brings a series of questions to the fore. For example, should we grant freedom of speech to those who argue against the very idea of freedom of speech? And where exactly runs the thin line between tolerance and the violation of constitutional rights? Universities in Germany, as well as in the US, continuously need to address how they put the principle of free expression into practice and how they simultaneously establish a framework which protects the entire university community from violations of free speech. The current protests against systemic racial injustice in both our countries make this task all the more urgent. The next 2 hours will allow us to compare our experiences, to learn from each other, and to engage in a truly open debate across the Atlantic. Once again, welcome to today's online conference on the culture of debate at universities, and thank you very much for your interest in this event. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce today's distinguished keynote speaker. Professor Dr. Susanne Beer currently serves as Justice of the German Federal Constitutional Court in the First Senate, where she reports, among many other topics, on cases of academic freedom. The German Federal Constitutional Court is Germany's highest court. In many ways, it fulfills a function similar to the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. Susanne Beer is also a professor of public law and gender studies at Humboldt University, Berlin. She has close ties to the United States and belongs to the global faculty at the University of Michigan Law School. She is also a corresponding member of the British Academy and has been teaching at Central European University in Budapest, which is now located in Vienna. It is an exceptional honor, and here I speak also on behalf of my co-hosts in Chicago, to have her here with us. Susanne Beer's keynote lecture is entitled Debate and Democracy, Universities Today. There will be time for a question and answer session after the keynote address. And now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. We do this? Okay. Thank you very much, and welcome to all of you present here in Berlin, present in Chicago, and present online. I feel honored to be part of this conversation because it can only be a small contribution to a huge discussion, to a diverse discussion, and to an ongoing debate. Some participants of this debate are at this table and will be part of the panel discussion. Some more should be represented in the future, and I hope many of you are online. My contribution has three elements, and I speak from the perspective of a sitting judge and kind of approach the issue that way. The first point will be taking a closer look at what we are really talking about. We, are trained to look at a case in detail, and I think it is necessary to really understand what people consider threats to freedom of expression and a lively debate at universities, what we understand the conflicts to be, what is at stake, who gains what, and who will eventually lose. The second point will visit the principles and the norms, the law, the values that guide our discussions and hopefully guide our future, the practices at universities. Freedom of expression, certainly yes. With equality for all to speak, because there is no one single voice out there, and with dignity, that is mutual respect. That might be, from a perspective of comparative constitutional law, a very German response to a very American starting point. The Americans starting with the First Amendment, freedom of expression, the Germans responding with Article 1, 2, 3, and 5 of the Constitution, dignity, liberty, and equality. And I will get back to that point because beyond being German or American answers, I think they're interesting principles to deduct from the global constitutional and human rights scene. The third remark will revisit and try to remind us of what universities today are really about. Why do we care? Because it's our job? Because we want our kids to get great study experiences? Because universities have been around? Because it's all about excellence, brilliance, metrics, research? Or because they serve a function in democracy? This, I think, is a starting point of when universities were invented in the 19th century, at least the university I'm talking about. And I think I want to remind us of that very democratic function of universities today. Before I visit those 3 points, 2 cautious considerations, I think, are in order. One, and I readdress something which has already been said, is what time is it now? What is the time we're staging this conference, this discussion? What is that date? We live in a time where certainly all lives matter, but where there is a need to insist on the fact that Black lives matter too. There's pain and trouble and anger and despair out there. And there has been a critique of white privilege, because I think this is what this is all about all along, but now it's on the agenda. I think this debate cannot be happening without taking that into consideration. For many American universities, police violence is also campus police violence. And for very many German universities, to address the issue and question of systemic racism is a rather new question. So there's work to do. And these are troubling times. Secondly, and Professor Alt reminded us of this, we live in times of threats to democracy, threats to the rule of law, threats to the very liberal societies we cherish. These are populist, nationalist, not least racist and sexist attacks on the very institutions we are talking about. Because this populism is not only about taking over a parliament or a government, which is bad enough. It's also about taking over courts, which is even worse. But it starts by taking over media and universities, because universities are the sites where populism, lies, fake facts, etc., can be challenged. So the times we are living in are troubling times on that account as well. Second cautious consideration is place. Germany and the United States, it's a small segment of the world. It's an influential one. It's a powerful one. And so it's definitely worth visiting. But we should be aware of the colonial gaze that can inform some of our discussions and assumptions we work with here. Secondly, no university in the US or in Germany is like the other. Chicago, great place, but very different from many others. Erlangen, great place, but very different from many others. And Humboldt University, great place, but very different from many others. So when we talk about university, let's face the diversity on the scene and be clear on what institution is it exactly we're thinking of, what practice exactly is it that concerns us, and what we want to fight for to make it a better future. So with these cautious considerations beforehand, let me visit the conflicts and take a closer look at what is at stake, who is in danger, who loses, and who wins in those discussions. Is the threat to freedom of expression to universities today the conflict about a speaker who faces student protests? Is it a watch blog that monitors a professor's lectures? Is it the demand to change the syllabus because it has been overly mainstream and excluded some voices? Is it the request to stop harassment, racist, sexist, etc.? Is it the students or younger faculty's calls for diversity in research, in teaching, regarding material, methods, and staff, not least? Or is it also the students afraid to speak in class? Is it the highly problematic, in fact false, assumption presented as truth and taught? Is it the power pleasure with no limits at the expense of the weaker parts of the academy? What exactly are we talking about when we're talking about threats to the university? And many of you will be reminded of concrete cases and experiences in your places, wherever you come from. The list I presented goes through some of the incidents that troubled German minds, but I think they're rather universal in structure, although very different in their details. So when we talk about those cases, what I think is interesting is the way they are told. In Germany, in the last few months, we have seen, and it's very similar to the American debate, as far as we can follow it, we have seen concerned voices that call our attention to, and I quote, censorship, hysterical political correctness, and thought control happening at university. These terms are used today to label student demands, noteworthy, student demands and interventions from the margins. Are these proper frames? For a lawyer like me, censorship has been a practice by the state, or at least highly super powerful agents, to censor the margins. But now there's a reverse in that frame. These terms are used to label those coming from the off into the mainstream. And so there's something interesting happening there. Also, we hear in all these debates a lot of concern about emotions, the comfort level of students or faculty, and snowflakes who don't want to melt. Are these the proper labels to describe harm, exclusion, or disrespect, and request a truly diverse viewpoint? I do wonder. As a feminist, I'm certainly used to the label emotional and subjective, but it has been employed to denounce and dismiss research that did not really attract the mainstream attention. So I'm very, very careful when I am confronted with these frames and would like to encourage you to question them and look at the power relations behind them. So when we now talk about the production of a robust debate and rigorous exchange at universities, what exactly are we talking about? What do we expect people to kind of take and, be robust about it? When does harm start that goes beyond a robust personality? Where do these personalities come from and are formed? I wonder who defines what robustness means in these contexts. And finally, there's an intense discussion to not or create safe spaces at universities and use or not use trigger warnings. What does that mean? Safe spaces, I think, are a wonderful idea, particularly if you want to be confronted with uncomfortable ideas and engage in learning and research. I think universities must be safe spaces. So what became the problem there? I do also personally remember entering a room at the University of Michigan basement, a dark room, where students met, then called Lavender Law. These were queer students. It was the first time in my university and academic life that I felt entirely safe. Why is that? I was not only not harassed, I was not rejected because of, more or less explicit feelings about a sexual orientation. And it was a space, and this is, I think, important, to really talk, a space not of closure, but a space to open for discussions, for robust debates. And there's a similar experience in my career as a female lawyer in Germany, joining the German Lawyers Association, a women's association, not a gendered one, not a super progressive club, but simply an association of professional women. What did I feel there? I felt safe. Why did I feel safe? Because there was not the boring machismo around, but a space to open up for very controversial debates. And I have to say, I've never seen more controversial debates than there ever in my life again. So safety, I think, from my experience, but also generally speaking, is a wonderful idea, particularly for spaces that want you to engage with critical thought, etc. Those who always feel as if they belong and are part of a mainstream and a canon might not feel that need, but others certainly do. So the threats that produce the conflicts around free speech in universities that form the background of this conference are first of all rather new, because the people who raise these concerns got access to those universities rather recently, although now their demands are deemed problematic. And these threats or conflicts, I think, are skewed regarding the frame they're presented in, because they reverse the power relations very often. Feelings and fear of the professors who keep teaching, isn't that an issue? Maybe the most important ones of the conflicts around are not those, but maybe the most important ones we should care about are the threats to academics for peace, are the threats to academics who engage in critical studies, are the threats to academics at CEU Budapest, now exiled to Vienna, are the threats to take over a university the way it was originally designed. So I think we have to keep these frames and the very nature of the conflict that forms the background of our discussion in mind. Second point, what are the principles, the norms, the laws, the values to guide us in these discussions? Freedom of expression, a natural United States, but also global starting point. The First Amendment in America, a Chicago emphasis, clearly crucial for teaching and research, but certainly neither absolute nor alone. But in the institutional context of a university and in a social setting with more than one voice around, there is a necessary addition to freedom of expression as a norm, a value, a principle to guide us. For a German constitutional lawyer, that's an easy task, but even globally speaking, there's more to what we care about as norms in universities. As I said, the German constitution, the basic law, starts with dignity, and this is part of the post-World War II consensus. Dignity was the never again to dismissal, denigration, degrading someone, treating people with no respect. So dignity calls for mutual respect in whatever encounter. The second right in the German constitution and internationally is liberty. Part of it is freedom of expression, but notably, the German drafters of the basic law also thought of speech, media, art, and research and teaching right away. It's captured in Article 5 of our Constitution. It's considered one of the key liberties to protect in any living democracy. The third point, however, which I want to emphasize, is equality. Article 3 in the German Constitution, but present in all constitutions in the world, in all human rights documents, in any value-driven, principled approach to these matters. Yes, in the United States, it's the 14th Amendment, but 14 does not mean late and unimportant. It is of crucial importance, particularly to the issues we are talking about. And this is in some way evident. There are many voices. Universities are not about the autistic genius. They are about exchange. And if there's more than one person to claim freedom of speech, and there are many voices to be heard and present, then what we care about is equal freedom. In German constitutional law, we have a technique, a test, a concept saying that no freedom can be guaranteed and protected at the expense of the other. We call that practical concordance, actually a concept derived from theology. But practical concordance, in fact, means that if you use your speech rights, you have to pay attention to the speech right next to you. The one limits the other, and none crushes, or should I say, trumps them all. So equal voices is the call of the day. And beyond that, adding dignity to the picture, equal voices means that these should be voices in mutual respect of each other. This creates another limit, for sure, the harm principle, a classic and liberal theory, meaning that your liberty ends where somebody else is violated in their interests, in their physical or emotional or otherwise well-being. So that liberal classic is an evident limitation to free speech. You can kind of refine that using concepts of dignity, and you can make it turn it into a more elaborate scheme to explicitly address equality. But these three components are all over the place. In addition, then, in universities, if and as long as universities are really about fostering conversations, this equal freedom in respect is key. So it's a little bit freedom of expression plus what I suggest to think about here. Speech rights, fine, but no freedom of expression to trump another. Philosophers may call that Habermasian or post-Kant. We call it practical concordance. Americans may think of James Baldwin, who reminded people in 1964 that you should not speak without also thinking about your audience. And some others might think of Hannah Arendt and the venture of going public that requires you to think as a political being that is not only of you, but also of the one next to you and on the other side. This is echoed in human rights law today. Article 15 of the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights from 1966 addressed that, but even before that, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Article 26 addressed education, and I quote, to promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship. And they all conceptualized the key liberty, freedom of expression, to be a liberty in conjunction, to be read together with equality and dignity. And yes, this results in limits to what one can teach or present as research in universities. But more importantly, as I tried to describe with my brief recount of the safe spaces, this results in opportunities to hear more voices than before, to remove the bias, to get away with the blind spots, to advance for a better future. So it's an opening device and not a closing device when we add equality and dignity to freedom of expression as guiding principles today. Finally, the third remark. When I say university, and when you say universities and debate at universities, we may think of rather different places. I don't know what you have in mind. Somebody in France may think of a grande école. that is pretty different from what I experienced in German education or American universities or Austria or Budapest, the CEU, which was again different. What kind of space is it you cherish? Safe for who? Meant to do what? The United Nations, again, praise higher education because, I quote, it has a vital role in promoting democracy, and access to higher education should be and is a human right. The Council of Europe runs a project, Education for Democratic Citizens, to counter the political challenges to undo democracy that we face today. So if universities are about a search for truth, but not on its own, but to advance humankind in democratic, that is, equally free societies based on mutual respect, then the university today has an utterly political function. In many, many, many academic circles, when you say that, there is a kind of dubious reaction. Politics, that's that other scene. And you do not need to be a systems theorist to say, yeah, they run on a different code and research is very different and research is kind of neutral and removed, et cetera, et cetera. But that is not the case. Research has a function, and it was actually planted in universities to serve that function. Sitting in Berlin, there's no way not to think of Wilhelm von Humboldt and the Humboldtian idea of universities, who was out to create a very attractive idea today, the Weltbürger, the cosmopolitan citizen, and created universities as the spaces to educate these people. That is, not manipulate them, but allow them to judge on their own, very enlightened, on their own what is out there to do, to fare better. In addition, beyond Humboldt, liberation movements, not incidentally, called for access to education and a voice in education. There is no emancipation without education. This may also add to the point or the argument that education, and specifically higher education, plays an entirely super important role for democracy. Today, this may even be more important than ever. Democracy, as was mentioned before, is under attack. There are strategies out there in what one may call the autocrat's handbook to undo democracies, to limit our freedom seriously, to present and manage inequalities rather than work towards more equality. So, particularly these days, universities play an important role to counter these trends. Think of authoritarian states. In authoritarian states, universities produce elites, and they present one truth, not searching for it. In Hungary, in Turkey, in Poland, but also in many, many other countries today, this is why gender studies, Holocaust studies, studies of national history that allowed for more than one voice have been either censored or simply closed or removed from the scene. There's a campaign going on. There is a handbook out there. And in that handbook, universities are a chapter. Autocrats threaten what I cherish as liberty, as an equal freedom of expression based on mutual respect. So in case you do care, and I do hope you do, care for that other type of universities, which is the university that these legal documents named in their post-World War II consensus as institutions, not only to promote excellence and brilliance and new ideas, et cetera, but to serve a function in democracy, in their collaborative search for truth via exchange of ideas, then equal liberties and mutual respect are a key component of this. Yes, free speech is an important and indispensable aspect of all these debates. It's not only a starting point of a discussion, it is a key element. But this discussion cannot be a productive one facing and countering the threats we face today without equality and dignity as additional principles to inform our practices, our policies, and the responsibility you all have as members of academic communities. So enjoy your discussions and allow as many as possible to participate. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much indeed, Professor Baer, for this excellent keynote, which gives us opportunity for a vibrant discussion. I would specifically invite the participants of our panel discussion to contribute to the debate, but you all are invited to write your remarks into the FA forum. I would like to start, just to break the ice, with a question picking up the debate on safe spaces. You have mentioned that safe spaces can work as rooms enabling exchange of those whose voices have not been heard yet. On the other hand, there is a question, how can we make universities institutions enabling encounters, and encounters can, to a certain extent, also reduce comfort zones. And I think this is a particular tension to have, on the one hand, the ambition to give everybody a voice, in particular those who haven't the chance to speak up. And on the other hand, how can we handle the potential conflicts which are given in rising debates, and what are universities about in terms of this comfort zone, the conflict zone and the comfort zone? This is a tension, I guess.
It is a tension, and it is a difficult question. There are no easy answers to this, but this is part of the answer. We need to engage in intense debates with as many participants as possible to address these issues. But it is a question of perspective and starting point, whether you assume that by now universities are comfortable places generally, and suddenly this call for other spaces are creating discomfort for some, or whether you assume universities are entirely uncomfortable spaces because you were not wanted there, you got access only late, your voice is marginalized, you're not looked at properly, you are dismissed as marginal, etc., etc. So depending on what you assume the normality to be, you will respond to the problem differently. I see the risk and the fear that the call for safe spaces may reduce the opportunities of exchange and criticism in universities. But I don't see the reality. I see the reality of safe spaces getting people, as one Chicago student just posted online, through university, because it was a room where he could really exchange controversial ideas without being dismissed, or in teaching via the Socratic method, exposed in front of his peers and his opinions deemed inaccurate or not relevant or overly emotional stated or. We all know of these events as well. So the discussion about safe spaces is an important one, in taking seriously that some people need them, and thus universities should provide them, while the universities as a whole should take care and still engage in as much as diverse a debate as possible. I think these two aspects do not limit each other, but the one safe space allows for the other to happen.
Thank you very much. There are some questions in our fora already. I would like to pick up one. The question is how to empower universities to backlash against rising populism, conservatism, and authoritarianism, especially in authoritarian states. So a more general question linked to what you have mentioned before.
There's an old term which comes to mind, which is solidarity. And if people think that's too lefty or ideological, think collegiality. And I emphasize this collegiality because I think that too many people underestimate that those early attacks on, say, gender studies or queer theory or critical race studies are attacks against all of us. These are not, targeting something which we felt was maybe not as quality driven as things should be, which is a ressentiment still present in many, many places. But these are attacks from a script. And that script says start with the weakest portion of the institution and play with the ressentiment out there. And then gradually expand into the more mainstream and stronger facilities. So an attack on universities and democracy and liberalism and equal freedom will not start with law schools, but it will start with queer theory at a law school, and maybe not hire that person. And maybe protest funding for that center, and maybe protest a school taking a stance in political or social controversies. And that then targets all of us, the mainstream, all of us, all those who care for universities. And I think in the past, there has not always been that outcry right from the start when our weaker colleagues were getting under pressure. And that should be one strong reaction. The other one is certainly a need to emphasize the relevance of research and teaching today. We live in times of fake news, invented facts, lies presented as truth. The corona pandemic is an example of sorts to tell us how important research is, but also how easy to denounce it and how functional or manipulated these scenes are. So the universities have an opportunity to use all kinds of examples. I could name climate change, I could name additional ones, to emphasize the role they have and be upfront about the political, the democratic function they serve in a society. I think things can be done. Finally, in addition, yes, universities, at least in Germany, but also in the United States, I think have to live up to the calling to implement equality. It is not a fact, it is a principle. It is not yet a reality, it is a right. And we have things to do there, because otherwise, why would one believe us? Calls for diversity, robust debate, et cetera, without diverse faculties, without diverse curricula, without diverse syllabi. So I think we have work to do. Now speaking as a member of the academy and certainly not as a judge, we have work to do to really diversify and implement diversity on our campuses.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There is one question which is reflecting the inner side of university teaching. And I would like to quote, how can the courts concretely help us as universities, teachers and professors in situations where a minority of students in, say, a lecture theater of several hundred protest because you discuss a controversial issue, for instance, the concept of cultural clashes between religions, homosexuality, and so on?
The courts are responsive actors. We tend to, now speaking as a judge, only help if we are called upon properly, and this comes late. So the first who have the responsibility to help are university presidents, deans, provosts, rectors, professors, all present. In German constitutional law, by the way, we always emphasize that freedom of research means being responsible for what you do there yourself, first and foremost. We step in very late. So courts are late actors and responsive actors. Courts and the law can help clarify the principles, and that's why I took the opportunity to expand a little bit on the notion of not only freedom of expression, but also the values of equality and dignity next to it, because that changes the debate. If you start with my right to speak and no limits, you end that discussion there. If you start with my right to speak, but your right to speak as well, and in respect of each other, you are in another dimension. It becomes more complicated, but maybe it becomes also more productive. So courts and the law can help clarify the principles because we're trained and used to apply proportionality and assess limitations and handle multipolar conflicts. That's certainly an important one. The example the question refers to is a mix, seemingly, of a very, very classic case in American constitutional law, yelling fire in a crowded theater, and an account of controversies which happen at many universities today, where students protest controversial views, sometimes false assumptions presented as truth and science. So there's a difference there, and we would have to look closely at what exactly we are talking about. But what I would like to say is that courts would definitely cherish any student who raises his or her voice in an auditorium. Isn't that what universities are about? Wouldn't we try to protect the protesters from being kicked out of the room? Isn't that robust debate to face protest? Isn't that what many professors wish for, their students to be more engaged, more upfront, more there? Then I think, and drawing on the law of associations and rallies, one would apply a test of that no right can trump another, so that the protesters cannot fully silence those who want to speak, while the speakers cannot fully silence the protesters. That is, law has kind of tools and methods and ways to think how to moderate a conflict in a productive way, rather than to finish, close, end a discussion, etc. End, finish, limit, closure. It's not, law sounds that way, but it's not our job. Constitutional law particularly is about opening a space and handle multipolar conflicts in those situations.
Another question is addressing the issue of definitions and interpretations. One issue I've found is that people will deem speech or lack of speech on a topic to be violent. While the US Constitution limits speech that directly incites violence, do you think there is such a thing as violent speech? And who is allowed to determine what is violent or not?
I think, or actually from the research I know, because at a time in my life I've studied that, I know that there is speech that creates harm, which then can be called violence. The term violence itself is a very debated term, a controversial term, or a term that developed. There's psychological violence, there's physical violence. Violence has many, many meanings. So violence is not an answer, but a starting point to discuss the level of harm inflicted by speech. And yes, speech does inflict harm. Certainly, there's speech acts. There's also there's great work out there, and I am convinced from that data that speech inflicts harm and thus can be called violence if your concept of violence captures that dimension of harm. Yes, that is one of the limits in my legal world, which is Germany and Europe and the human rights law, is accepted as one limit of speech. Because whether you take a knife or whether you take your words, but hurt someone the same, and that can happen in very different ways, is not decisive, because what is decisive is that human rights guarantee you a protection of your safety, health, and emotional well-being. And emotional well-being, by the way, is not comfort. It is health. It is the very baseline of how you can be a person in the world. So yes, speech can be violent because it has harmful effects, and that produces a limitation to speech. The difference then is between discussing something which is a harmful experience, which is highly problematic, which is detested by some, and teaching it as if it were right. This is the difference between research and ideology. And so when we look at the controversies, that is what I think becomes important and interesting. Is the speech somebody wants to defend really about a robust debate and inquiry? So does it also consist of questions? And is it based on mutual respect for people who feel differently about things? Or is it preaching something as the truth you simply have to take or you leave? That is not the idea of a university. The idea of the university is that all stay, and then we discuss together what counts in the future and what should be acceptable, etc., etc. So yes, violence is a limit as based on the harm principle. John Stuart Mill and others, very classic liberal thinkers of liberty, and thus also on freedom of speech. And this is established in almost every court I know of in the world, from South Africa to international human rights. So for lawyers, this is not news. For people, it's often pretty evident that there should be such a limit. It is, however, in each and every case, difficult to exactly define where that limit is. There, sometimes courts must help. Very often, universities themselves are better able, with ombuds people and committees with diverse voices present, to assess when harm starts and when speech should end.
I think we have time. Sorry, again, I could not be heard. One final question. How do you rectify your commitment to free speech with limitations of conservative or dissenting thought in any way? When conservative thought becomes the overwhelming minority, which is the case at University of Chicago, why should additional protections of speech be offered to any group but them?
I appreciate the power analysis of the situation. If that is the case, that at the University of Chicago or in any other institution, there's an overwhelming majority that dictates what to think, etc., then there's a challenge out there. And then one should certainly address it. I keep reading things, even from the University of Chicago, and I have not had the impression, but you are there, so you are the ones to judge it. However, the very function of freedom of speech classically was to protect dissent and minorities, whoever they are, whether they're conservative or progressive or whatever. In the old days they were called progressive, but these labels change as well. I was, however, not talking about additional protection for anyone. I was talking about protection for everyone. Equal protection. And that does not mean special treatment or extras. It means to take into account how people, in what situation people are, and assess the inequalities you are talking about, the person who asked the question, the inequalities in the power relations, and then act accordingly. This is way beyond any symmetrical neutrality or some other of that type idea, because there is no such thing as neutrality and distance from the scene out there. There's always a decision to support and address and recognize or dismiss and denounce and marginalize. And so we have a complicated scenario in front of us, which we have to assess regarding the power instances and then address properly, again, properly based on the principles of equal liberties based on mutual respect, and not properly based on the principle of one speech for one because they're endangered. Everyone is always endangered on some count. It's a complicated scene, and we need principles to address all of them together rather than one of them with an absolute right heralded against the other.
So thank you so much, Susanne Beer, for these fruitful comments. Thank you for the questions, the interventions. I took the liberty to select them a bit because we had many questions. It was a group of 20 questions. So thank you again. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to Daniel Diermeier.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Alt, and thank you very much, Professor Beer, Justice Beer. My name is Daniel Diermeier. I am a professor at the University of Chicago, and until recently, I served at the university as its provost. And it's my pleasure now to introduce a video that gives a little bit of an overview on the pedagogical and philosophical approach that the University of Chicago has with respect to free speech and education in general. So the University of Chicago, perhaps unique among universities in the United States, was founded on a firm set of principles and a clearly stated purpose. The purpose was a focus on field-defining research and a transformative education. And these principles that were stated over 130 years ago still have guided the university throughout its history. And then there's a point of view on how research and education should be conducted so that it has those impact on knowledge and education. And the fundamental belief is that they're best served through a culture of open discourse and free exchange of ideas. So what you will see in the video is some of the aspects of how this was put in practice throughout the history, Every president of the University of Chicago, every provost has reinterpreted these principles in the context of their own times. And I think you get a little bit of a context of that as we move to the discussion. Thank you very much.
The University of Chicago started, unlike many universities, as a research university from the very beginning. This meant that people came here because they wanted to be in a serious intellectual environment that would produce ideas of lasting importance and value. Since its inception, the University of Chicago has believed that the most empowering education takes place in this environment of open discourse and free expression. This stamped the University of Chicago and has lasted till the present day. Faculty want to be in an environment in which their research is going to flourish, that demands that they be able to articulate, test ideas, and be able to think freely without constraint, and be able to actually deliver an education in which students are empowered to deal with multiple perspectives, to deal with confronting different ideas. One needs open discourse in order to provide ongoing intellectual challenge.
There's a long history at the university that freedom of expression was in itself the most important form of education, and that education was, in effect, education for freedom. The university needs to protect the autonomy of the university itself as a space of freedom and protect this intellectual excitement and all those people who are part of this institution.
There is a deep history of exclusionary behavior in our society. Free expression and diversity and inclusion actually go very much hand in hand. In an environment in which you have a diversity of perspectives, diversity of backgrounds, what we want people to be included in is the most empowering education that they can possibly have.
The years that you spend in college at a university are very distinct moments in your life. It is one of the few times when you will be exposed to this level of diversity, people of different generations, people from different countries. It's essential that people are open to those ideas, that they hear people who are different than they are. Organizations, countries, institutions are better, stronger because of our differences, not in spite of our differences. My hope is that students are inspired by this environment and inspired by this opportunity.
The most meaningful conversations I've had during my time at UChicago have been those that have pushed me outside of my comfort zone to consider different perspectives and different viewpoints. The university's attitude towards free expression reflects the belief that a true liberal education is rooted in free speech.
Free expression is actually under challenge in an ongoing way. We're not in a unique time when this is happening. We're repeating a pattern that has been going on for a very long time on university campuses and in the country as a whole. When I started seeing potential speakers being disinvited at other university campuses, I knew that this was counter to our culture and that it was something that would not be happening at the University of Chicago. So we commissioned this faculty committee to write what has subsequently become known as the Chicago Principles. The central point is that the university is there to be an umbrella for multiple perspectives, and the university will not stop speech because some collection of people think the speech is wrong or offensive. This is an environment of intellectual challenge. We made it very clear threats, harassment are not part of what free expression means on the University of Chicago campus.
At a time when there have been quite a number of incidents that some unpopular speaker be disinvited, the University of Chicago has been a leader in its very clear reactions, which is that we don't do those things because someone might be offended. The point of education is not to make you comfortable, it's to make you think. People need to be able to speak for themselves in ways that create not only your own independence, but in a way to fortify your own courage and your readiness to become part of a larger world where those things are going to happen frequently.
Knowing that the university had these principles of free expression was a huge factor in me choosing to come here. We do bring controversial speakers to campus, and whether or not I agree with it or disagree with it has taught me to be a good listener. And that's an important part of free speech too, and it has contributed to my personal growth. And every time I have been challenged by students, which has been many times, it's been respectful, it's been civil, and I'm better able to understand their positions, and it's made me more receptive to those around me.
It is not simple to have your assumptions challenged, to sit and listen to somebody expressing things that you may find offensive. And it requires courage for you to be able to think through your own assumptions. But the value of having an environment of free expression and intellectual challenge is that the students come out empowered to deal with the complexity of the challenges that they're going to face in their future.
And in all the talk about what is it that college prepares you for, this is, I think, perhaps the most important thing of all. It prepares you to become an informed and active citizen as a more independent person and understand that as they're dealing with other human beings, they can be both free and humane.
All right. Thank you so much. Free expression, a University of Chicago core value. I hope and I'm sure it's not only a core value at the University of Chicago, but at many universities around the world, which also poses the question, if that is the case, a core value shared widely on the campuses, why is this entire event tonight necessary at all? What's the real status of free expression and academic freedom in Germany, the United States, and elsewhere? And what can universities around the world do to safeguard this freedom of expression? These are some of the questions we are going to discuss during our upcoming panel, some of the questions that already have been discussed in the presentation. My name is Jan Martin Viada. I'm a journalist for education and research, and I'm looking forward to a lively debate. Before we start, let me briefly introduce my fellow panelists. You already met virtually Professor Peter André Alt, a German literary scholar and former president of Free University Berlin and now the president of the German Rectors Conference. Welcome again. You already saw Professor Daniel Diermeier, who has been Dean of the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy, and until recently he served as Provost of the university. And just in a few days from now, starting on July 1st, he will become Chancellor of Vanderbilt University. So this is also some kind of your final event, I think, for the University of Chicago. It's great to have you here. I also like to welcome Geoffrey R. Stone. He is Edward H. Levy Distinguished Service Professor of Law at the University of Chicago Law School. He also is a highly recognized First Amendment scholar. He served as Dean of the Law School from 1987 to 94 and as Provost of the University from 94 to 2002. Welcome. And I also like to introduce to you Katrin Kinzelbach, who is Professor for the International Politics of Human Rights at Friedrich Alexander University Erlangen-Nuremberg, and she's a non-resident fellow with the Global Public Policy Institute. Outside of think tanks and academia, Katrin has also worked at the United Nations Development Program, serving at various studio stations. And Katrin, I would like to start with you. You have been one of the main authors of a report that has been published in March for the first time, a joint project of your university, the University of Gothenburg, the Global Public Policy Institute, and Scholars at Risk. Title, Free University. The report introduces a brand new global time series dataset based on expert assessments involving 1,800 and some scholars from around the world, covering more than 100 years until 2019. Well, and it came up with 110,000 observation points, 8 indicators, and an aggregate index on academic freedom called the Academic Freedom Index. Looking at that index, Germany is performing very well. So first, Katrin, only from a German perspective, why do we need this panel today at all? Obviously, Germany is performing very well when it comes to academic freedom and free speech.
Well, yeah, thanks for the question, and hello to everybody in the audience. Of course, the data that we have collected shows that academic freedom in Germany is really actually very well protected. I should say that the index gathers data on a country year basis, so we are not looking at instances at particular universities, and of course, a general countrywide score doesn't exclude the possibility that there are also attempts to limit academic freedom in this country. But I really would like to underline that in a global comparison, we have a very comfortable situation. I work a lot on China, for example. I have lived in China. I have also taught at CEU for many years, and therefore, even here in Europe, there are places where academic freedom is at much greater risk. I think we need to really differentiate between academic freedom and freedom of expression. These are two different but interrelated concepts. For the United States, we don't have the aggregate index data yet, but we have some data on freedom of academic expression. And also there, I must say, the United States is faring well.
So if Germany is faring well, if the United States obviously is performing pretty well, and even though academic freedom and freedom of speech is not the same, one might come to the conclusion, well, why do we need this debate tonight, Katrin? Why do we need it from your point of view?
I think it's a very timely debate, and I think we have just heard some reflections on the time. This is also a debate of global importance because, of course, we operate in a globalized academic world. But I do think, because we, of course, also discussed the Chicago principles today, we have had a reaction to increasing challenges, at least perceived challenges, to freedom of expression by the University of Chicago when it announced these principles. So I see a certain reactionary move there also, so a reaction to challenges. And I would be very interested in discussing this further because, of course, historically, when the University of Chicago got engaged on these issues, there was political context. And I think we cannot understand any norm entrepreneur without trying to understand the political context. But our American colleagues, I think, are much better placed to speak to that. So maybe we should listen to them first and then discuss further.
Thank you very much, Katrin. And this gives me the opportunity to move on to Geoffrey R. Stone. A wonderful video screening a couple of minutes ago. When I was watching, or when I am watching something like this, I tend to think, though, why do they have to stress something that should go without saying? So why do you have to stress that at the University of Chicago, freedom of speech is a core value? Shouldn't this be something natural without saying?
Well, first of all, historically, that has not been the case at American universities. Throughout our history, American colleges and universities have censored faculty and students who have, for example, challenged creationism in the 19th century, or during World War I, opposed the draft or opposed the war, or in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, took positions in favor of socialism or communism. There's a long history in the United States of universities not being committed to freedom of expression and to tolerance of views that offend the leaders of the university, the alumni of the university, and students in the university. Chicago has, in fact, been distinctive throughout its history in taking a different position. I should note, by the way, that I chaired the committee that wrote the report. And so we gave a lot of thought to the history of the university and learned a lot about that. And two things I think we took away from that is, first, the reality is that censorship often turns out to be wrong, in the sense that when you look back with hindsight, you can say, what were they thinking? How could they possibly have thought it was appropriate to silence people who advocated civil rights for African Americans, or who advocated women's rights, or advocated gay rights, or supported socialism or communism, or opposed the war in Vietnam? What were they thinking? They all thought they were right at the time. But with hindsight, you look back and say, no, they were wrong. They were living in a moment where it seemed right, but it was wrong. And the other thing that I think we take away from that is, who do you trust to make decisions about what ideas are right or wrong? The answer, I think, is nobody. I don't trust anyone else to decide for me what I'm allowed to say.
So
now,
this means...
if I were the czar, I wouldn't mind having the power to decide what anybody else could say. But if you want a truly free society and an open academic environment, you can't have authorities deciding what ideas, what points of view are permissible and what are not.
So this means there should be no limitations to free speech at all. We heard about balancing rights earlier, fundamental rights, for example, free speech, equality, inclusion. So there should be no limit to free speech at all, Geoffrey?
There are lots of limits on free speech that both the Supreme Court has recognized in interpreting the First Amendment and that the University of Chicago has recognized in our statement of principles. So restrictions of speech that are not about content, time, place, and manner, how the use of loudspeakers that interfere with classes, that kind of stuff can all be regulated. Moreover, there's certain categories of speech like defamation and threats and harassment that can be regulated and that are allowed to be regulated under the First Amendment. But it's ideas that cannot be prohibited. So that's the key to it. So you can regulate speech in lots of different ways, but to say that an idea is impermissible is what we say a university should not do.
Before I move on to Daniel Diermeier, there has been I would call it case study the last couple of days at the University of Chicago, talking about Professor Harald Uhlig, actually. The University of Chicago has closed the investigation into the claims that he has scorned Martin Luther King Jr. during class. There has been a wide debate on what he was allegedly said and also on the tweets he sent out. So what's your take on that?
Well, the incident involving the Martin Luther King Day was in class. And in class, professors can be restricted in certain ways that aren't permissible otherwise. For example, you have to teach your course. You can't decide to teach something else. The concern that had been raised by some of his former students was that on a particular occasion, he may have acted in a way that was insulting and harassing and discriminatory. And the university looked into it and apparently decided that was not, in fact, an accurate characterization of what happened. And they absolved him of having done anything inappropriate. And that is appropriate because if he had done something that was truly racially insulting and degrading to students in a classroom, that would be subject to restriction.
And right now, the university says there is no basis for more investigation at this point in time. Thank you very much, Daniel Diermeier. You're originally from Berlin. You spent most of your academic life in the United States. How different are the cultures of academic debate when it comes to free speech as you are observing them between the US and Germany? And maybe, again, this Harald Uhlig case is one good case study to look at it when it comes to the culture of debate.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me on the panel. So I've lived part of my life in German universities, at the University of Munich, and then in the United States for most of my academic life. So I do have a sense of the context and the differences there. I was also, I think, struck by some of the things that Justice Baer earlier said, which has to do, of course, with the constitutional and political context that's different between the two countries. And if you just think about the different constitutional traditions, the centrality of the First Amendment in the United States, German constitution, because of its particular history, has a particular different set of emphasis. So you have clear differences there. What I think is essential to the debate is that we do not confuse those different political and cultural contexts with what I would say are the kind of foundational questions in the context of the university. What do I mean by that? I think that we share, whether in Germany or the United States, or most universities around the world, a kind of idea, I believe, for what universities are for. And you heard that clearly expressed in the video. You heard, Justice Beer talking about it. And if I may, pick up off one of the ideas, to me, one way to think about universities, they're places where people can where they can realize their full potential, and where we engage in debates and discussions about, what is true and what is just and what's beautiful. And we do that by, metaphorically speaking, sitting around the table, and now we discuss and argue. And the great, I think, aspiration of the university is that in these settings, to kind of slightly paraphrase Habermas, the better argument wins, or it's the force of the better argument. And universities have fallen short from this idea, and still sometimes do fall short of that. For example, over many decades, universities in the United States, in Germany, were exclusionary. They excluded women, they excluded minorities from participating on this debate. They think they have worked very hard to change that, and have recognized that to have a more diverse university is a better university, not only for the people that now have a seat at the table, but for everybody else. That's number one. But the second piece is, I think, where the concern comes in is that because of the special context, because of the experience of marginalization and so forth, making sure that everybody participates requires work itself. It's not always an obvious thing. And participating in the work of university requires, a particular set of norms. For example, the ability when you participate not only to say something, but the willingness to be convinced by a better argument, I think is an important academic norm as well. Where things get problematic is not so much about bringing voices in. I think that is already encompassed by this point of view. Where things get problematic, where you want to silence other voices because they make others uncomfortable, or are things where they find deeply offensive. So that, I think, that's where the real question is. And that is not so much a question, I think, about particular history or political structure. It's really a question about how do you think about your university? What's your point of view in education and research? And just to finish that, there can be diversity. We have that in university, we have many universities in the United States that have a religious or spiritual tradition, and they may put certain limits on that. At the University of Chicago, since its founding, the view was we want to put as little provision of that as possible, that there's maximum freedom for the faculty and the students to engage, because that creates the best and most transformative education and has the best chance of advancing research.
So what would you reply to Justice Bear's notion of safe spaces as something positive, as something that actually empowers free speech? Obviously, as I understand your point of view, you think that somebody who's claiming safe spaces hinders the debate.
I think there are two concepts of safe space that need to be clearly distinguished. There is where the idea of safe space comes from originally was really to create literally a space where marginalized groups would be protected from harassment. And that's the origin of that. And that seems to me completely unproblematic. The debate has been over what's been called intellectually safe spaces. And I think there the question is not so much, that's not about creating a space where people are free from harassment, but that's a question about whether certain ideas or questions are off the table because they make a certain group uncomfortable in a particular way. That, to me, that's the critical question. And again, different universities can draw the line differently. At the University of Chicago, the view has been is that when you engage in debate, even if the ideas that are expressed make you uncomfortable, or controversial, or are offensive, the university administration will not regulate them. Mm-hmm. People around the table may regulate them, and they may say, that's a terrible idea, that's stupid, and so forth. That's fine. But the university, as an institution, will not interfere in those type of debates.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Peter Andre Alt, getting back to you. This debate on safe spaces, this debate on snowflakes and so forth, is this a very American debate? Is this something that you also observe at German universities? Or maybe the risks or the problems in Germany are different ones when it comes to free speech?
I think that this is by no means an American phenomenon. The details might differ, but we had to witness a number of incidents at German universities that causes concern and that has led us to reassert the right of freedom of expression. And we had also a debate on safe spaces, both concerning the levels of instruction, but also the general political framework. The sheer number of these incidents is also on the rise. And in this situation, I think a campus mirrors the larger society of which our universities are a part. So I think we had, to a certain extent, the situation which was more comfortable a couple of years ago. But now we had, for instance, a case in which a professor used his seminar to invite a number of right-wing populists and claimed academic freedom. We have seen at times violent student protests against professors and their lectures. And we now entered the process of struggling concerning the question, is free speech an issue which is consented, or is there a dissent on the certain aspects of free speech? So free speech as an issue is under threat, but it's also in the process of discussion, and this is reflecting the American situation as well.
Just to clarify this, if a professor invites right-wing speakers to the university to speak, is this something that we should allow and cherish or not?
I think it is causing a general question how to organize it. When I was in charge of Freie Universität, we had similar examples. Our students used to invite politicians, in most cases from left-wing parties, and we were encouraging them to do so, but to embed the invitation into an academic framework, into a seminar which could be self-organized by them, closely linked to junior researchers, in the end autonomously and independent. But it was important, and the major premise for the invitation, that the talk would not be a campaign. I think the universities should not be the place for political campaigns, but they should be the place for political discussions. And if these discussions are embedded into an academic environment, I think we can also contribute from the academic side to these discussions, and we can shape the discussions. And if this is given here, then I would not have any doubt that you can also invite someone from the right-wing party, but you should embed it also into a forum which bring up many voices and a diversity, not only one party. And if this is given, and I think the academic discourse has many means and tools to balance discussions, to offer a transparent approach, to reflect issues, to critically comment on these issues. All these instruments of our intellectual discourse are appropriate, highly appropriate, to organize a discussion and also to balance these conflicts. But if this is not the case, and if we are opening our universities to campaigns, then I'm critical, and then I'm very reluctant whether this is the right way. I think if we're talking about the university as a role model for society's freedom and for social issues we want to protect, then we should also, I think, should also contribute from our side, by our means, our methods, how to form a debate, how to shape a debate academically. This is an enormous an enormous issue that we can here contribute to the debate. And we should not abandon these standards. We should stick to them. We should adhere to them.
Mm-hmm. Geoffrey Stone, I'd like to ask your opinion on that. If Peter Andre Alt says, okay, right-wing people, when it's embedded in a class, that's fine, but we don't want them to campaign on campuses or at universities. Is this something you would agree with? And who sets the limits? What is coursework? What is campaigning? I know that there were some right-wing people who wanted to speak at universities in the US, and there were those issues that actually led also to the Chicago Principles in a way.
I think that it's important to hear people whose views you disagree with, so you understand what they're saying, what other people are hearing. Not only to see whether you might be wrong in disagreeing with them, but also so that you understand what they're saying. So when you address those issues, you can address what their arguments are. So I think there's a positive value in being open to hearing people whose views you completely disagree with. Now, the political point is a little odd. I don't think that the university has any policy on the question of having people come in order to make political campaigns, but certainly we have lots of politicians come and speak at all sorts of events, and nobody thinks twice about that. So my guess is in general, that would be permissible. But more importantly is this notion that if someone thinks it would be useful to have a right-wing person come and speak or a communist come and speak, even though the society regards those views at any given point in history as completely wrong-headed, I think it's important to hear them and to understand why you think they're wrong. So I think it's perfectly appropriate to have speakers like that.
Katrin Kinzelbach, the way we debate right now, or we have our debate right now, it seems like freedom of speech or academic freedom is more endangered than it has been a couple of years ago. Is that something that you would share this opinion or this view that free speech, at least at German universities, is more endangered than a couple of years ago?
Well,
is the situation different from 5 or 10 years ago?
Our data doesn't show that. We have a continuously very high performance, and for the United States, we can see a very small dip on this variable on freedom of academic expression, specifically with regard to political issues. The US remains at the top of the score, but there is a very small drop that I think should be taken seriously and discussed. I do want to say that I perceive personally rather big differences between the situation in the United States and in Germany, and this is primarily, I think, also a question of context. I think in the current situation in the United States, there is a very divisive political terrain and, in fact, an antagonistic terrain, and the universities are being used as spaces for a political struggle. And I think it's rather difficult for universities to find their positions in such situations. I don't think we have that kind of confrontational atmosphere here in Germany. I have, personally had some encounters of people trying to take recordings of my classes, which is actually not allowed without permission, but these were very sort of minor things that I felt were relatively easy to handle, and we don't have these kind of large scandals about inviting or disinviting, with just very few exceptions. I think when we look at the video that you just showed us, it said one very interesting thing, and it said it's not easy to have your assumptions challenged. And I think what we see with people who like to discuss why certain speakers get invited to campus, they challenge our assumption of being a neutral space. And I think for that, we should, welcome their thoughts and listen them out. What are the arguments? And I really would like to challenge this idea that a university that says, basically anything goes, and as long as a faculty member invites or a member of the university invites, is appropriate. I don't think it strikes the right balance between freedom of speech and all the other values, including respect and equality. And so I would really like to have a much more detailed discussion on specific cases and understand the rationale specifically of people who protest. And if they protest because they say that they themselves feel targeted by the speaker, then I think we need to take them absolutely seriously. And I feel that this is quite different from a sort of top-down demand on universities censoring speakers.
So my impression sometimes is, looking at German universities, that we are talking a lot about freedom of expression and not so much about inclusion and equality. Would you agree with that we should talk more about inclusion and equality at German universities, Katrin? Is this something that we neglect, maybe?
Well, we can never talk enough about these issues. I think that we are also living in a country, especially when you look at the academic scene, which is not very diverse yet. I mean, we are just trying to increase the percentage of female professors, and I think we are, on the right track, but there's a long way to go. And in terms of backgrounds, other backgrounds, I mean, we basically have a very wide academic scene. So the fact that these discussions in the United States are much louder also is, I think, thanks to more inclusion, both among the faculty and the students. And I hope that we should cherish these debates with us. Of course, we do also have some discussions on trigger warnings and so on, and maybe we can still come to that because I think it's part of the debate.
So Daniel, maybe this is something that Americans should be proud of, that they have this bigger aspect of inclusion, that there's more diversity, and all the debates about trigger warnings, about safe spaces is something that is very much valuable because it shows the importance of inclusion, whereas German universities to some degree are still elitist, white dominated.
Well, the American universities for the last 20, 30 years have really worked hard to increase the diversity of their student body and their faculty. Very hard. And it's hard work. And it's hard work because, of course, you're dealing with, senses of tremendous, inequality and challenges, and it's very difficult to do. And it requires a sustained effort and intentionality. And I think then also like having or living in a university context that is more diverse creates its own challenges, and you have to work through that. And I think some of the issues that we have touched upon, I think are consequence of it. I think it's great to have them because they in some sense reflect the real challenges that we go through, as societies and in university. And I think universities need to be the place where these issues need to be debated. I think that the thing that I'm worried about is that we don't lose what makes university special and what universities aspire to and what it means to be a university. And of course, even that is debated and debatable. And so there's a self-referential quality that we should not forget here. But I think sometimes there is the concern is that the fundamental values of academic discourse and discussions can be swept away by the passions that come with the broader political issues that we're all facing with. And I think our responsibility as academic leaders is to talk about it, to engage in dialogue, but then also to step up and make sure that we defend those values when we think that they're under threat.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think Geoffrey, go ahead, please. Yeah.
I mean, the point about diversity and its role in all of this is really an important insight. When I was a student at the University of Chicago Law School, there were 2 African-American students in my class of 165 students. Today, the class is 10, 12% African-American. When some of these issues began occurring in the last 5, 6 years, I went back and talked to some of my students from 30 or 40 years ago, African-American students, and said, how come you guys, were there no issues then? Did nobody do anything wrong? And they said, no, there were lots of times when I was miserable, when I thought people were saying things that were wholly offensive and inappropriate. But, I wasn't going to go out there and do this. And I think creating a critical mass makes an enormous difference. And it's a positive thing because it's enlightening. And because knowing that things you're doing are in fact hurtful and destructive of a good academic environment is an important thing to learn. Mm-hmm. And even though you're free to say what you want, it doesn't mean you should. Mm-hmm. And advocating for civility and mutual respect, which is another key part of the Chicago principles, is something that you learn how to do much better when the students who are minorities speak up and educate you about things you're saying and things you're doing that you never realized were offensive and disturbing. And that's a critical part of how you learn as an institution, to deal with these issues.
Talking about critical mass, there has been a question earlier on during or after the presentation of Justice Baer that maybe there is now an overwhelming majority, or there are people who think that there is an overwhelming majority of progressive left-wing people at university, and that the true minority at universities in the US are the conservative ones, and that they should be protected somehow, not the other way around. That's an interesting point of view that I would like to discuss in a minute. But before, I would like to introduce Paul M. Wren to you from the University of Chicago Communication Department, who's monitoring the Q&A section. And you are always encouraged in the audience to add your question there, your comments there. And Paul, you will just add them to our discussion in a minute. Thanks for doing that. But first, let's get to this point of who is minority and who is majority on campus. We know that there are right-wing people out there who try to describe the universities in the US as leftist places where the conservative voices are an absolute minority, and actually that this majority of leftist people try to silence those voices. Daniel, what would you reply to that?
Well, there are two answers to that. The first one is an empirical question. You know, is it true or not? And to that, there's an empirical answer. And then there's another question. It's like, what follows from that? Or, you know, how do we think about that? And I think that universities and university leaders are well advised to hire faculty based on their academic credentials without regard what their political point of views are. They bring their whole self to the university, of course, and that's going to be part of, you know, participating in the university community. But what we should do as university leaders, whether it's deans or chairs or presidents or provosts, is to really focus on what is the intellectual contribution that this person brings to the table, without regard of whether they are on the left or on the right or on the middle and so forth. I think that's the fundamental focus.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if I can build on that.
Sure,
question.
Go ahead.
It builds on some of the questions that are coming in, and I think Daniel certainly helped provide some answers to that. But in some ways, the universities are curating speech through, like you just mentioned, who they're hiring as faculty. But it's also happening through who they're admitting, what is being funded, and even what is considered diversity. Is diversity typically going to be gender or race, or not other areas that may constitute diversity today? And so the broader question is, how do all these things get balanced to truly create a very open culture that allows this debate to flourish even more richly?
Mm-hmm. And who decides what diversity actually means? Who defines the term of diversity and says this is a diverse background that we actually want to create, Geoffrey?
So I think the answer to that question is first of all, it depends on the institution. But I think ordinarily the leaders of the university will set forth their aspirations for intellectual and other forms of diversity in the institution. But it's the units that make the admission decisions and who are basically deciding on what kind of a student body or faculty they are looking for. And I think that they do take into account, definitely take into account, issues of diversity based on issues like race and on wealth and poverty and on gender and political views, maybe to some extent. But I think the admissions officers are looking to create a diverse environment that will enable the students to confront a broad range of experiences and ideas, and not to be a homogeneous group that has free speech and free expression, but they're all talking to themselves and they're not really hearing anything different. So I think part of what makes an academic community successful is making an effort to bring in a diverse set of students and faculty members who will learn from one another and will give them perspectives that they otherwise have not been exposed to.
Mm-hmm. Peter, do you see this kind of effort to bring more diversity to universities in Germany if you look at the faculty, if you look at the faculty that has, I don't want to give wrong numbers, but I think below 10% of German universities are of international background, for example. 23% of professors are female. I could go on with migration background and so forth. So obviously the efforts are not that strong yet, are they?
I think we are at the very beginning when it comes to diversity. We had a focus on gender equality, and we made slow progress. It is slow, but it is progress. The diversity issue came on the agenda very late, relatively late. But I think actually we made progress in integrating much more students from different backgrounds. This is an enormous step forward. If you take a look at the usual students groups we had in German universities in the 80s, in the 90s, when I did my study, I can remember this very well. This was a completely white university, and now it has deeply changed. And we have to learn that it's not only about students; it's about productivity. And I would define diversity as a sheer intellectual benefit, because if it comes to research, if it comes to recognition, you can see that it's a question of perspectives, and the richness of perspectives makes richness of science and research. And this is very much depending on diverse perspectives and insights. So diversity, you can define it following and according to many other indicators than we have mentioned. Actually, diversity is a productive power of universities. And I think universities have grasped this actually also in Germany. But it's a long way also to fund those who are now studying and to bring them into a career path, a reliable career path. But I think this is a question of the next generation. I hope so.
So long way to go. Katrin. Are you silenced?
Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to pick up the idea that actually universities curate speech. And I think that's absolutely right. And in fact, I also think it's their task. Universities' task is not to protect any kind of speech. Universities' task is to facilitate academic exchange. And I think this is a very fine line, and I think the line that we are trying to find. But an absolute notion of free speech disregards other rights and values, and the notion that the university as a whole can in reality act neutrally, I would argue, is a fiction. And those that challenge particular speakers, for example, in the United States, I think often are motivated by two different reasons. One, there are challengers who say, this is deeply offensive speech. I don't want my university to provide a platform. And here I think we need to listen to the reasons and also discuss what kind of format might be appropriate to give space for those people who would like to oppose those speakers. And the other reason is actually quite different. It is deliberately trying to get controversial speakers invited at a university in order to create political havoc, and then point to the universities as institutions that don't allow freedom of expression. And this is a political manipulation of the role of universities. And so I find we need to really look instance by instance what is happening, and then depending on that analysis, I would say the university has to also take different steps.
Thanks. So Paul, let's move on to the next round of questions.
Sure. This is a somewhat timely question, at least in the United States, as we see ongoing discussions, debates, protests around racial injustices in other areas. Now there are debates about removing names from buildings, taking down statues, taking down plaques as a way of showing an avoidance or shutting down of different thinking and ideas. And the question is, how do people feel about doing that, particularly on campuses?
Who is those people who feel about that? Well, Geoffrey, how do you feel about that?
I think that insofar as the statues are honoring a person, and we have come to understand that it is not a person that we actually honor, that it is perfectly appropriate for the institution itself to take down a statue. The institution decides what statues it'll put up, what statues it won't put up, and in that context, it's not censoring anybody else, it's engaging in its own speech. And I do think that it's appropriate for an institution who makes those decisions all the time to decide whether this is someone we should be honoring or not. I think you want to be careful. As if I were in a position to make those decisions, I'd want to be careful. I wasn't being inappropriately bullied by people who were telling me to do this, and I wasn't being censorial in doing it. But to the extent you're talking, for example, about people who defend slavery in the United States, I think it's always been bizarre and inappropriate for us to honor those people. They were traitors to our nation, and they advocated and supported views and policies that are completely antithetical to the values of our nation. And honoring them really does not make a whole lot of sense. So if the University of Chicago had a statue of Robert E. Lee and people wanted to take it down, I would think it would be a sensible and reasonable thing to do.
But what if there are people out there who feel different about Robert E. Lee?
They're perfectly free to express their views, but they can't force the university to put up a statue, and they can't force the university to keep up a statue. That's the university's decision.
Mm-hmm. Daniel?
I think that it's an interesting question. I think the way Jeff thought about it, that this is fundamentally a decision by the university about a decision of what it honors and what it doesn't honor. I think makes a lot of sense. The one thing that I would add to that is that I think it's important that unless sometimes they're totally obvious cases, but of course the interesting cases are where it's not so obvious. And in those types of things, I think it's important that one does this carefully, that one has a sense of what the context is exactly, because what we're doing there, we're making a statement very often about the country's history or the institution's history. And these are important statements that are made. So the only thing I would say, they need to be carefully considered, and not in a as a response because of in a rush context, or because there's a particular pressure. That's the only caveat that I would put to that. Like with everything else, when we make a statement about the values of an institution such as a university, it needs to be done carefully, reasoned and thought about, and not in response to a particular type of pressure from one side or the other.
Katrin, right now we are starting a similar debate about that in Germany. There are debates about Kant, for example, right now, and dealing with this person, not with his philosophy so much, but maybe with the person behind it. So how can we deal with that, and how should we deal, for example, with the memory of people like Kant or Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther? How should we deal with them?
Well, this is a complicated debate. I think the intellectual contributions people have made, need to be always also situated in time, and then it will not be surprising to find, with many of our big examples in academic history, that there were elements of their thought and elements of their activities that we would today find deeply inappropriate. And I think we should be thankful for having made that intellectual and human, basically, development to now see those problematic aspects. And I don't think we should shy away from having those discussions. I don't think we should shy away from criticizing particular actions or also thoughts in big names, in intellectuals that we otherwise cherish for their contributions. And I think we will find that in many instances, and I think we see that because people who felt offended have now started to point that out. And again, I can only say that if people say they feel offended by a particular content of a class or of a reading, then that should be the beginning of a very interesting discussion.
We are running short on time already, Paul, but we have time for one or two more questions.
Okay, thank you. There is a question that's come up of just trying to gain a further distinction between academic freedom and freedom of expression. And I wonder if each of you can really share your philosophy on the differences between the two. Why are they each important in their own right?
That would be great. It would be great if all of you could answer, and all of you could answer very briefly. Katrin, you want to start?
So I think that freedom of expression is part of academic freedom to the extent that it facilitates the academic pursuit. But not all forms of speech are protected by academic freedom.
Peter.
So I can fully agree in this finding. Academic freedom is including the freedom of taking perspectives and expressing them. But there are also ethical limitations. The German history gives us a couple of sad examples, but many histories, national histories, give us examples. So I think we have to handle the academic freedom by enabling people to express themselves, but we have also to take care of the, I won't say limitations, but the background, the framework, and the level of reflection. And if we are following our mission as universities, we have to keep up with this expectation to provide intellectual environments which enable people to reflect themselves, but also to understand what others are doing by reflecting themselves.
Daniel.
Yeah, so I add one more piece to this, perhaps. So when we think about academic freedom, of course, that's about, you know, being able to pursue the type of research and academic activities without constraint. Of course, like everything else, there are constraints. So you're not, you know, you can't falsify your data. You know, you have to get an institutional review process before you engage in experiments, and you have to follow lab safety. All these things are part of the environment, but within that, you know, you do not want to regulate or constrain what faculty are working on, how they talk about it in their classroom. I want to add one thing I think which is important, which is that people bring their whole self to the academic pursuits, their personality, their background. I mean, that's one reason for why we want to have diverse faculty in there, their political beliefs and so forth. And I think it's like, it's an illusion that we can regulate that in any reason. I think the way it works best is to put people together and to have a confidence in the process of exchange of ideas and intellectual debate that is fundamental. I think that I think is something we just have to keep in mind. I know that, you know, there are different points of view on that, but it's just a fact that people bring, even in mathematics, they bring their own personality and their own background and their own beliefs in there. And for all of us that have been in academic seminars, these debates can be very intense, even if they don't involve any political point of view.
And Geoffrey?
I think academic freedom is focused primarily on the academic work of the institution. It's about scholarship, it's about teaching. And whereas free expression goes well beyond that. It goes on the right of a faculty member to put something on social media, or a student to put something on social media, or students to invite their own speakers to come and talk to them about things they're interested in. So I think the free expression issue is within academic freedom as part of it, but it also goes well beyond what we would ordinarily think of as academic freedom. The other difference is that academic freedom, we do evaluate and make important judgments about what we think to be the quality of the work. We will deny tenure to someone whose academic work is not up to what we think it to be the appropriate standards. But we will not prohibit a faculty member from inviting a speaker because we think that speaker does not meet those standards. So the free speech side is different in important ways from academic freedom. They overlap, obviously, but there are differences in terms of why we have them and why we think about them.
So we're almost out of time, but I have one final question to all of you. And this time I really need short answers from all of you. And that is, we can talk on this topic all night long. We can continue tomorrow. But if it comes to us personally, to each and every one of us, is there one thing that all we can do to promote free speech on campus? One little thing that each of us can do in their daily routine, in their daily lives to promote that? Just one short thought, not about institutions, not about organizations, but about all of us. Geoffrey, you want to start?
Promote civility and mutual respect. Recognize that there are ways to achieve one's goals, to make one's arguments that do not needlessly hurt and offend people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important for people to think about that, to be conscious of it, and to avoid gratuitously creating problems that you don't need.
Mm-hmm. Peter.
Beyond all aspects of the issue of free speech itself, I think we have to handle the productive conflicts which are derived from free speech, and you have to be aware of the fact that these conflicts, if you can manage them, are the very center of a creative and productive university.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, one little thing, one small thing that all of us can do, that you can do personally to promote free speech.
I think what you want to do is to talk to as many people and in as honestly a way as you can that have different point of views from you in a respectful way.
Thank you very much. And Katrin?
Well, I think we have to learn how to differentiate between disrespectful speech and hate speech. And we have to be ready to draw the difference, to draw a line.
Ready to draw a line. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you very much to Paul as well for curating our Q&A, our questions. And I think there are many more questions that we couldn't address in this short period of time. And thank you very much for your thoughts, for your insights. And let's wrap up our session tonight with some final remarks by Professor Alt and Professor Diermeier. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I want to thank all the panelists, Justice Baer, for participating today. I think this was an example of what universities can do and it just highlights the importance of university as the place where difficult topics can be discussed in a serious manner by listening to different perspectives. On a personal note, I'm particularly happy to participate in that and have the University of Chicago co-host with the German Rectors Conference, which is just a wonderful way to kind of address that topic. University of Chicago has been, since its beginning, heavily influenced by the German university model. It was arguably one of the first universities in the United States that really was heavily influenced by what's now known as the Humboldt University and University of Berlin, and exactly the types of values that are central today are part of that intellectual heritage. So I'm personally particularly pleased that we were able to have this discussion today. I thank our co-organizers, and I'm going to hand it back over to Professor Alt.
Thank you very much, Professor Diermeier. I think this was a timely topic and a very fruitful discussion. Since we all must expect that threats of free expression will continue to demand our serious attention in the future, it's our task not only to protect this issue, but also to enter a free exchange on risks, on problems, on conflicts. So I'm very grateful that Susanne Baer gave us such an excellent keynote address. I would also like to thank our German participants, Katrin Kinzelbach and Jan-Martin Viada, for facilitating the discussion. And I should also thank our partners at the University of Chicago, your president, Provost Lee, Daniel Diermeier, Jeff Stone, and also thanks to the team that made an excellent job, Candice Müller, Ashley Johnson, Nikki Nabasny. Thank you for supporting this event and making it possible. And good night from Berlin, since here it's already 8:30. It's still warm and bright, but the evening is beginning.